doing a little chit-chat, less scripted episode.
Well, we haven't had a script yet.
No,
We've been winging it every time.
We often have at least a little bit of a plan, though. Or an idea of a plan.
There's no plan this time.
No.
I have my notebook.
We just have thoughts. No plan, just thoughts.
I have a lot of thoughts. And my notes.
So, I guess we should do an intro. Hi, Internet. It's Emily S.W.
Sam.
And we are here with, I don't even know what episode of the Podcastle.
I believe this is 5.
Episode 5 of the Podcastle.
We had a little bit of a
break.
A break for July. July was
busy. We were both busy, and then I had COVID, which sucks. Stay safe, folks. But yeah, so today we are discussing The Picture of Dorian Gray by the one, the only Oscar Wilde.
Correct.
Everyone's favorite sassy gay man.
It comes through. This book was published in 1890.
And it was not super well received. There were some mixed feelings.
Yeah, it was a little much for the critics of the time, I think.
Yes, which, considering Oscar Wilde was critiquing society, makes sense.
Well, there were also points where I was listening to it, because I listened to an audiobook version. I did not read it with my eyes. I read it with my ears. Where also I kind of thought, like, the plot here is a little weak.
Yeah, it's not a very plot-heavy book.
Oh, it's a very dialogue-heavy book.
Yes, you could really tell that Oscar Wilde just wrote this as a playwright. He's like, you know what I'm going to do? Well, I was reading the background of this, where he had the idea after a friend of his made a portrait of him. And he thought to himself, man, it's a shame that I'm never going to look this good again because I'm going to get old and this portrait isn't. And then he was like, light bulb moment. That sounds like a story. But I was reading that somebody from the magazine that this was originally published in was looking for short novels, for novellas. And so he commissioned Oscar Wilde and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. And so they both wrote for the same magazine. Oh, there is.
Yes?
How do you feel about this?
Do you like Oscar Wilde's writing?
Have you seen any of his plays performed? They are much better performed than reading them. I mean, it's a play, so it's... What astute analysis.
You know, while I was recording a video the other day, she came and she just sat here on the guitar case and stayed there. Very nicely.
Man, it must be something about us having the conversation that she feels the need to...
She wants to be involved.
Are you a gothic kitty?
She is a black cat, so she's already got the goth points. She earned her goth card just by being born.
That's true. Oh, are you purring? Hello. I've completely lost what we were talking about. Oh, I was telling you that it was commissioned.
For a magazine.
It was called like the London Magazine or something. It was a very generic name. I didn't write it down clearly.
I was reading about censorship.
Yes, censorship. Talking about Oscar Wilde, boy, censorship.
And it was, it was still too spicy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he also, I don't know if retaliation is the right word, but he wrote a preface to, like, the next edition. It came out, like, a couple years later. And he was basically like, this is art, mofos. Don't be lame. This is art. I'm an artist. I'm saying things.
Most of the censorship was just to make it less gay.
Yes, it's even the censored version is still pretty gay.
It is. I was listening to it, and I was listening to Basil Hallward talk about Dorian. Man, this guy's in love.
Yeah.
He was infatuated.
Like, even toned down, even less gay. It's like, well, this is kind of gay, though.
Basil really gassed him up.
He did. He
was going on about how wonderful he was. What a great friend.
And how beautiful.
How beautiful, and, like, do they describe his personality so much? He's charming, he's...
youthful, full of youthful innocence, or... I think they call him at one point pure or unmarked or something.
Yes.
Ironic.
Purposely. But also, when he actually comes onto the scene and they're describing, like, his curly golden hair and all this, it's like, they're describing him as, like, cherubic.
That's true.
Right? Like, it's almost angelic.
There really is... I mean, obviously, if you don't know the general plot of this story, Basil is an artist. He paints a portrait of Dorian. And then Dorian is like, man, I wish that I could be young forever like this portrait, and the portrait would age instead of me. And then his wish comes true, and he's like, I'm gonna live this hedonistic lifestyle. And he's helped along with that by an older gentleman.
Oh, yes. See, this was not his original thought.
No, it wasn't. He was guided on it, which I'm gonna come back to. Put a pin in that.
Okay.
But this entire novel there's a lot of imagery and metaphor and allusions to, there's like a lot of flower symbolism. They talk a lot, obviously, about looks, about very shallow beauty, aestheticism. Whole novel is kind of this commentary. And it's also full of great quotes. But that wasn't why he wrote it. He wrote it to be a commentary on society at the time and the morals of the upright, kind of stiff...
The upper class?
Yes.
You know, people don't like seeing themselves in these kinds of characters.
No, so Mr. Dorian Gray is kind of helped into this idea of, I should live this hedonistic lifestyle by a Lord
Henry.
Lord
Henry. Lord Henry had some of the absolute best dialogue.
He did.
In the entire book.
Yeah, and his role is basically, he does not do any of the things he tells Dorian to do.
No, he doesn't. He is almost like he's conducting an experiment.
Yes.
On Dorian.
Because he's an older gentleman, you know, he's got this wife and this family. And
he's not that much older.
Not that much older. But he's like, now this guy, he has no wife, he's not a lord, so he doesn't have these responsibilities. Let's see what happens if I set him on this path.
Lord Henry is a friend of Basil, the artist. When we first hear about Dorian, it's Basil showing the portrait to Lord Henry, telling Lord Henry all about how wonderful he is. And Lord Henry comments about how amazing the portrait is, which leads into Basil talking about how Dorian's his muse and all this other stuff. But when Dorian actually comes onto the scene, Lord Henry kind of takes him aside. Like, they go for a walk.
Yeah.
Right? And Lord Henry starts feeding him these ideas. He's the one who tells him, well, you know, the most important thing in this world is looking good. Beauty is the only thing that matters.
Yeah, he preaches this very... shallow is the only way to describe it. Shallow way of living where you should... Vain. Yeah, you should experience everything you can possibly experience, and morality is not good and evil, all this kind of stuff. Which is very hypocritical of him, because that's not the life he lives. He might think that, but he's a He is too scared to step out of the bounds of society, even though he really wants to.
That's why he's running this experiment.
Yes.
Dorian. Dorian is an orphan, for one. His mother and his father were not a blessed marriage.
No.
His mother had him with his father against her own father's wishes. So he's been raised by his grandfather now. There's a lot of tension there in that family. He's not the proper heir, right, to whatever is going on with that family.
No, he's kind of a black sheep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that primes him to be susceptible to Henry's little ideas, putting them in his head. It's like, you should do the opposite of probably what your family wants you to do. And Dorian is like, yeah, my family kind of hates me. I'm the odd one out, and there's all this bad blood. Whatever. I'm gonna go off and do my own thing.
Yeah. Dorian really lacks conviction. He doesn't have a very strong sense of self.
Mm-mm.
And he's very easily manipulated by Lord Henry.
He is.
There's really no other way to put it. Like, he's so impressionable, even as an adult.
Yeah, he doesn't have his own set of morals, which is why he's so easily manipulated, but also, I think that's also why he goes down the path that he goes down. Because he doesn't have this view of, this is good, this is bad, I'm just gonna do whatever I want, and I have no consequences because my portrait is getting ugly, but I'm not. And so because he didn't have that framework of right or wrong, he doesn't view people as people. Like, he doesn't have this framework of, oh, other people also have feelings. He's just living for himself.
But then when after his little garden walk with Lord Henry, and he comes in, he has an absolute meltdown.
A little tantrum.
Yeah, he throws a temper tantrum about the portrait.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when the whole little magic happens, right? We don't find out till quite a ways into this book that this stuff is happening to the portrait.
Yeah, isn't it after Sybil?
It's after the stuff with Sybil, yeah. But that is quite a ways. It's like the halfway or something through the story.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's not a lot of plot in this book.
No, there's a lot of talking, and even as I was listening to it, I was like, this sounds like it's written for the stage. Like, even the prosy bits were written like stage direction. There's a lot of, like, they go to dinners and they talk to people. Lord Henry spends a lot of time insulting people in some of the most fantastic ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really, Oscar was just like, I have so much stuff to say, I'm gonna cram it all into this little novella.
Yeah, so it's just like, you know, rich people saying stuff and looking bad. It's like the whole first half of the book.
Yeah, really. I mean, in the framework of Gothic, you do often have meandering, but usually there's more plot in a Gothic. Usually there's, at least stuff happens.
A little bit, yeah. This wasn't like I should say, through the first half of it, this didn't have the melodrama of Gothic, aside from Dorian's temper.
Yeah, he does have a soap opera temper.
Hence the little fit on in front of the portrait about how it was going to be beautiful forever, but he was not. Created the
whole scenario.
The scenario, yeah, well, Basil gives him the portrait, and he hides it away because he's so angry.
Yeah, it's a very mature response.
Took more notes during the second half of the book.
Well, because there's more to take notes about.
Than I did in the first half, and I really wanted to remember, like, I wanted to make more mental note of some of Henry's little quips.
Well, yeah, because, like, the first half of the book is just, like, drama, tea time, gossip. It's like watching a gossipy YouTube channel. Yeah.
The one I do remember is when he was describing someone, he said, she is like a peacock in everything but beauty. That was
such a good one.
That was so good.
Such a singer. Oh my god, I wish, because we were going to discuss this and reading it and stuff, I actually looked up I Love The Importance of Being Earnest, which is one of Oscar Wilde's stage plays. That's like one of my all-time favorite anything. And I was looking to see if there was anything kind of in our area, and there isn't.
Ooh.
I know. But I love The Importance of Being Earnest. And it really is Oscar Wilde's quips, unmatched. Iconic.
Should we I guess move on to the next, like, actual, like, the plot?
The actual plot? We should probably talk about Sybil.
So we really have to talk about Sybil.
The representation of women in this book.
Women were not great in this book.
No, you could argue might also be a commentary on the station of women in Victorian society. But
yes,
also...
you could also say that Oscar Wilde didn't really think about them a whole lot.
Yes, there is also that.
We had a lot of people, like, kind of thrown at us in the beginning when they were going to, like, these parties and dinners and things, and these ladies that were just kind of, I don't want to say they were superfluous, but they were, but also, like, their personalities were superfluous.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, there wasn't a whole lot of characterization going on with any of them, and they were all kind of depicted as, like, gossipy, and...
They just existed for Henry to make quips about.
Yeah.
So, by extension, for Oscar to make quips about high society women.
There isn't a lot of sympathetic women in this story.
I mean, you do feel, I think, sympathy for Sybil.
Sybil, yes. She's, like, the only one who really matters.
Yeah. Yeah, she's basically the hinge on which the plot turns.
Ultimately, yeah. So who is Sybil?
Sybil is an actress who, a lower income area and, like, not very nice theater. Dorian decides to go to this theater and falls in love with Sybil because of her act.
Can I say, the theater that she performed in was a Shakespearean theater. Once again, Shakespeare is coming back.
It's true.
I'm starting to think that you cannot write a Gothic story without mentioning Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Shakespeare has at least been mentioned in every single thing we've talked about so far. In some capacity.
That's true.
Either, like, quote it, or, like, in Carmilla, where they were keeping up on their English by reading Shakespeare. This Sybil is a Shakespearean actress. Not from the time of Shakespeare, but she performs
No, she performs, yeah.
Twice. And I think...
She's not a time traveler, that's a different story.
The theater, what I was thinking, the theater is something like what Shakespeare was written for. Normal people.
Well, and I'm sure, too, like, it's an easy thing to allude to, right? It's very commonly known.
Everyone knows Shakespeare.
Everyone knows. He's
apparently
the bard.
Yeah. If in the English-speaking world, we should clarify.
Yes.
English-speaking world, Shakespeare is, you know, the man who needs no introduction.
The man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about it, I think, that stands out is because that's direct references to Shakespeare like that aren't really a thing in modern literature. They reference him because he created so much of our language And so many movies and books are referencing or based on his stories, his plots. But he's not name-dropped a lot. In a lot of modern literature, modern TV, it's not like people are just, oh, I'm reading Shakespeare, or I'm a Shakespearean actor.
But he's still there.
He's still there. But it's subtler now.
I'm gonna have to figure out how to incorporate Shakespeare into every single Gothic story I write. Because apparently it's a requirement.
I'll have to revise the plot structure.
Yeah. Must allude to Shakespeare.
Yes. If you don't allude to Shakespeare, it's not a Gothic. Disqualified.
But anyway, Sybil.
Yes. Sybil is a Shakespearean actress, and Dorian falls in love with her because of her acting. Very important to note, it's her acting. It's not her looks, it's what she's good at. And also, I think it is pertinent to mention here. This book also, obviously, is about beauty and aesthetics and whatever, but it's also about art. The portrait is art. She's an actress. She's an artist in that sense. And the way she makes art is what Dorian is attracted to. I think this book is also very specifically a commentary on art and the state of art itself.
This still holds up if we look at modern celebrity culture. Because you don't see, when you see people on stage, you see people on your screen, you hear people, I'm going to say on the radio, you don't know who they are out of that context. So when people have celebrity crushes, it's the same thing.
Well, we have a word for that now, parasocial.
Yeah.
That came about kind of because of this YouTube social media influencer age.
And you're looking at this person and seeing the product that they're putting out, the performance that they're doing. You're not necessarily thinking about the person themselves. You're thinking about them in the context of this art they've created.
Curated.
This is still a very valid way to look at it.
Yeah, I think there's a reason that the picture of Dorian Gray is still relevant and still taught, at least in American school settings, because you can apply it. It's still applicable.
And much like some parasocial relationships that go too far, Dorian conflates Sybil with the character she's portraying.
Yeah, her value to him is solely in what she does on stage.
It's not even necessarily about Sybil Vane, the person, but he's saying, oh, well, it's like being with Juliet, or, being with these characters.
Yeah, it's like the idea of love, not love itself.
Mm-hmm. Because she's good at portraying these characters, obviously, you can't necessarily, just take her out and put someone else in, because it's the way she does the craft. But in Dorian's mind, she's not a real person, like you said before.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't think about people as real people. He's thinking about her as a character in a story.
In his story. Mm-hmm. As a side character in his story. He's got main character syndrome. In a bad way.
So when he takes Basil and Lord Henry to see a performance and she does very poorly, he's totally embarrassed. He doesn't take it well at all.
No, and Basil and Henry are like, oh, you love her because she's beautiful. And he's like, no.
Oh, she's a good actress. Well, where's the good acting? It's not happening now.
Yeah, so it's kind of it's a different sort of vanity here, where he's not in love with her because she's pretty, but he's still not in love with her for who she is as a person.
He confronts her about it.
He does, which does not end well. Spoiler alert.
She says to him, because I have this real thing, so she actually has genuine affection for him. Well, she thinks their love is real. She thinks it's genuine. And when he tells her, no, it's not, and she tries to explain, well, because I have this real thing in my life, acting just seems so fake.
Yeah, she's basically like, I was acting to escape my life, but now I have this good thing, and I don't want to escape my life anymore, so acting is basically what she's saying. It's like, I don't need this escape anymore, because I have you. Which is a very sweet romantic sentiment. However, Dorian is an ass.
And, well, even if you still wanted to encourage someone not to give up their career.
Yeah, at this point it's their career. Yeah.
Right? It's there's ways you can say, but, this is what you've worked for. You've, practiced for this. You're so good at this.
It's like in Avatar: The Last Airbender when Zuko joins Team Avatar and he can't firebend anymore because he was using rage to fuel his fire and he's not angry. So he has to find a different source of firebending. That's what Sybil needed.
Right.
She needed to go to find the Sun Warrior.
Right, like, I think it's still worth telling someone, but, like, you have this talent, and it's not worth giving up everything you've built for yourself on my account.
Yeah, you should never, this is a life lesson, do not give up on your dreams or yourself because you're in love with somebody. It is normal to compromise in a relationship, but you should not compromise yourself.
That's what I was thinking as this scene was going on.
Yeah, so even Sybil's love for Dorian is in a way shallow. She's now hung her entire life on him. So she has no self-worth. And so when she puts her self-worth off the stage and onto Dorian, and Dorian's like, I don't want this. She's nothing. No. She's herself is just gone.
Yeah. And she proceeds to gone herself with it.
Yes, she does. Now this is kind of the, I don't know if it's not really the climax of the story, but it's the lead up to the climax where she dies. She kills herself.
Oh no, this is just like, you called it a turning point earlier. I would call it a turning point. It's not the climax. The climax is the death of someone else.
Yes. Different death. This is definitely a turning point because, and we should also mention real quick, because it's going to come back later, Sybil has a brother, and the brother not fond of Dorian, but doesn't know Dorian's name.
Also, just kind of briefly, he's only in one chapter at this point where we're kind of meeting Sybil's family. Mm-hmm. And then he's in the Navy.
Yeah, so he
goes off to sea and he leaves.
For a long period of time.
I have a lot of thoughts about the brother.
Okay.
So we'll again pin him for later.
But he does come up later, so we do need to mention him, and he was immediately like, Sybil calls him Prince Charming. Sybil calls Dorian Prince Charming, which we should also mention. Because I think Oscar was like, hey, if you haven't gotten the point of this story yet, I'm gonna hang this right here. He's called Prince Charming. Like, in case you haven't realized what role Dorian plays here.
But not a fairy tale Prince Charming.
No, he may look like a fairy tale Prince Charming, but he is not that. A little more of a Grimm's fairy tale here than Disney. Not that Disney existed in 1890. James doesn't like Dorian, but he goes off to the Navy before all this happens. So then he joins the Navy, and then this whole thing with Sybil and Dorian happens, and Sybil kills herself. This is the first part where the portrait comes back.
Dorian had actually, I think he looked at the portrait again right after coming back to his own house after this encounter with Sybil. He looked at it.
Oh yeah, before she killed herself.
Because he wanted to make himself feel better or something. And he noticed that the face had changed. Just ever so slightly. It's got a bit of a scowl now.
Yes.
And at first he kind of thinks maybe he's imagining it. And he covers it back, I'll look again in the morning. When he looks again in the morning, it's the same. Mm-hmm. It's still scowling back at him. And this is when Lord Henry comes and breaks the news about Sybil. And he expects Dorian to be upset, but he's not. Now, as the reader, we also happen to know that Dorian was preparing himself to go apologize to her.
Yes, we are privy, unfortunately, to Dorian's thought process.
But now that he's kind of been freed of this responsibility, he kind of just goes, not my problem anymore.
One, it's also important to note, he wasn't apologizing out of genuine
affection.
Genuine affection or genuine guilt or remorse. He wanted to apologize because, I guess I should, I ought to. This was a vain, a shallow kind of morality, where it wasn't something he actually believed. He's just like, well, I have to because society says I should go apologize. And then when she dies, he's like, well,
yeah,
there's that. Done with her. No remorse. Which is basically just Dorian's character. No remorse.
Mm-hmm. From here, the story just, goes 0 to 100.
Yes, the first part of this book, you could get rid of the first part of this book, and you would lose some banging one-liners, but it wouldn't affect the story.
Though I do have to say, between this and the next really big event, not a lot really happens either.
Well, no, because isn't it just more of him doing...
There's a lot of Dorian doing stuff.
Yeah.
Now
experiencing hedonistic, sensual...
Yeah, it's not... I mean, it is described to us, but the book spends a lot of time describing jewels. And things that belong to kings. And what I thought was very interesting, I have in my notes, Faust.
Ah!
Remember, Faust sold his soul to the devil, Mephistopheles, in exchange for youth. Dorian has also kind of sacrificed his looks. Or to gain his looks, he's sacrificed his soul, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically.
Here we have, he spends a lot of time fascinated with exotic, worldly things. He spends a lot of time describing things from, like, other cultures to us, things that would have been considered exotic, I put that in quotes, to people in the British Isles.
Yes.
At the time. You know, things from other parts of the world he finds very fascinating. Very new and exciting. And the jewels of kings. He spends a lot of time talking about kings and their crowns and their jewels and all this stuff. And I also was thinking, like Faust, at least in Goethe's rendition, eventually he kind of, and we saw this in the film too, that we watched. After a while he kind of started getting bored. Yeah. Like, the novelty wears off.
Because once you have everything, you've got nothing to work for you. Like, there's nothing to do anymore.
In the original mythology, Faust actually kind of, like, traveled around the world doing magic tricks and all this other kind of stuff. We saw in the film he did, like, travel all these different places and saw all these different things and, you know, whatever he wanted. Basically, with whoever he wanted. Yeah, essentially, yeah. Well, then after a while he starts getting bored and, you know, in Goethe's Faust he kind of starts to realize the error of his ways and goes back to Gretchen. Also, Dorian, the more he's researching these kings, he starts to realize that a lot of these people's lives ended in tragedy. Gee. He's starting to see some parallels with himself.
Well, and the thing about it is, like, nothing has any meaning at this point.
You know what? I wrote down here. Lack of meaning.
Mm-hmm. Because, and I mean, again, Oscar, dear old Oscar, Mr. Wilde, is definitely critiquing Victorian society at the time, but he's not saying, oh, these fussy hoity-toity types, like, they're, you know, we should go towards this Puritan worldview. But he's also not saying we should do what Dorian's doing. I think he's trying to argue for something in the middle, where it's like, you have to have a personal set of morals.
You want to know what profound thoughts I had here?
Do tell.
I have that gilded beauty hides ugliness. And Dorian draws comparisons between this and the sins of the rich and powerful.
Yes.
For all their money and jewels and all, like, the furs and the expensive clothes that they wear, it does not make them good people.
Nope. Beauty does not equal goodness.
We've hit it. This is the moral of the story right here.
We've still got quite a bit of story to go.
We do. This was just, again, the middle. Because does Dorian see these comparisons?
No.
Well, he does.
Well, he does, but...
Does he see how they could affect his own life? He does. But not in the, well, I should clean up my act kind of way, but in the, how do I avoid this happening to me? How do I make me not susceptible to the same pitfalls that these other people experienced?
Yes, which is his big mistake, because that's what everyone thinks before the fall.
Oh, and does he ever fall?
Yeah.
So, Dorian is gaining a reputation.
Yeah, he's definitely, because he's going out of his way to experience all these things, because that's kind of what Henry was like, you know what you should do? You should go out and experience everything. Get all the experiences you can. So that's what he does. Dorian goes out and he does a bunch of stuff that is not discussed in polite society, shall we say.
No, and you know it's not discussed.
No, it's not. Mr. Wilde kind of leaves that to your imagination.
Yeah. I was also thinking, is like, man, we hear, especially when we're getting towards the end of the story, we hear a lot, people are talking about Dorian. We hear a lot about people talking about Dorian, and people saying, oh man, this guy, he's done some things, but we never hear what those things are.
That's part of the censorship, I'm sure.
But we do see one of those things right on screen. So after, I think it's like 10 years or 20 years.
It's been a while. I think it's 18, because I was just looking at this. It's like 18.
Time has passed.
Yes.
Dorian happens to run into Basil again. And, well, at this point, because Dorian has been checking on the portrait, and it gets more distorted through the years.
Yeah, you'd think that would be a bit of a red flag of maybe all these things I'm doing not great. No. Maybe,
Well, Dorian takes Basil back and they look at the portrait and Basil is like, you need to change your ways.
Yeah, Basil
you need to clean up your act. Like, this is not, we need to stop.
No, you are not the man I fell in love with.
You know what I wrote down here? You're even worse than I heard. Basil's also been hearing all these rumors. And he's like, oh, it must not be true. Like, that can't be my Dorian.
Yes, because Basil, you remember, because it's been a while. So in Basil's head, Dorian is still the perfect, beautiful, shining example of young, youthful innocence that he painted.
And he certainly looks the part.
And underneath that, he's a wrinkly old prune, shriveled up, rotting away.
You know what? I was not prepared for what happened next.
No, Dorian really loses it.
And I think the main reason for that is because it is so violent.
Oh, absolutely.
Usually that kind of violence is not described to us in the page of a Victorian novel.
No, but I think here it serves a purpose. Audience, if you're not keeping up, if you haven't read this, first of all, go read it. Second of all, Dorian brutally murders Basil. Brutally stabs him.
And it is described to us in detail.
Yes, and I think that is a very important decision on Oscar Wilde's part.
I was shocked.
Yes.
If I were I, as a modern person, was shocked because I was not expecting that out of a book written in 1890.
Yes. Pearl clutching is the term.
If I was reading this in I would have been shook. I still was, because I wasn't expecting that.
No, and I think it's important as to Dorian's development, because up until this point, well, like you said, we don't really get specific descriptions of these things that he does. We just know he has a bad reputation. He's researching exotic, air quotes, things, and jewels, and probably doing gay stuff, and gambling, and drugs, whatever.
Yeah, we haven't gotten to the opium yet.
Yeah. The violence against Basil is the first time that we, the audience, see Dorian as ugly as his portrait. Like, we don't see any of the things that are making his soul shrivel up. But this we see. And it's done in front of the portrait as well.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, almost like this last line that he's crossed, and now it's all downhill from here.
And I also was thinking too, because it's Basil, the creator of the portrait, and we know that Basil has had this very strong affection for Dorian. He's Dorian's victim.
Yes.
It just, there's so much in the choice. Like, it's not like just some random guy from the street. It's not Lord Henry, who is the one who kind of pushed him in this direction.
Yes.
It's probably the one person in the world who genuinely, other than Sybil, questionable, they didn't really know each other. Probably the one person who genuinely loved him.
Well, yeah, and that's another thing about this story, is that anyone who has any sort of affection for Dorian, no matter how deep or shallow or real or not it was, does not end well. You've got Basil, you've got Sybil, and then there's another lady later. Oh no, she doesn't die, does she?
Who?
He's trying to clean up his act at the end, and there's this other lady. But she's not really important.
No, I didn't even write her down.
Yeah, women in this story not important. Except for Sybil. And she just existed to die.
And I also kind of think Basil kind of fell victim to the same kind of, celebrity worship kind of thing with Dorian, because he was very infatuated with Dorian's appearance.
Yes, and he was equating beauty and good looks with being good, which is not That is a false equivalency.
They also were, like, actually friends. So we
Yeah.
can say Basil, pre-Lord Henry,
Mm-hmm.
had probably a better grasp of what his personality was like.
That's true. Yeah, and then look where that got him.
Dissolved in acid, apparently.
Ah, yes. So then Dorian does what anyone would do after brutally stabbing your friend. You blackmail someone else you know who has access to acid.
Yeah, into disposing of the evidence.
This does not go very well because then this poor man kills himself.
Yeah, he did that.
Out of the guilt. So now Dorian is not only harming his own soul, he's harming everyone around him.
So, opium.
Yes, so then we go to, we.
We follow Dorian.
Yes, we, the audience in Dorian's head, follow him to an opium den where, who should be there?
Oh, we had him pinned.
James!
Should we unpin him now?
Yes.
Here he is.
Take James down off the
James
shelf.
Vane.
He's returned from the Navy.
Sybil's brother. Can I just say, I was thoroughly disappointed in how underutilized James was.
Yeah, it could have been a really good revenge story.
If I were writing this, modern day writing,
Mm-hmm.
James should have been like a lurking background menace
Yes.
the whole time. Like, Dorian should have been running from him through the whole story.
Yeah, that would have been plot.
That would have made this a thriller.
Yes.
But that's what should have happened. James, when he was in that one chapter, when we went to Sybil's family, he is in the opium den because he's trying to hunt down Dorian, even though he's really got no idea who he is.
Mm-hmm.
But he overhears someone talking, and he's like, "Ah, that's the guy." But then Dorian's like, "Well, look at my face. Do I look like someone who's in their 40s?" And James is like, "Nah," and lets him go.
Yeah, this was before plastic surgery and Botox, so...
And because Dorian's not aging
Mm-hmm.
at all, he still looks like he did 18 years ago. Well, James lets him go. And that's actually the last we see of James alive.
Yeah, because then later, James realizes through talking to somebody else, like, oh no, that is the guy. I'm gonna follow him to this hunting soiree. Soiree, the right word? Hunting party thing. So...
This made me like Basil's death, but this one made me angry. And it was just so anticlimactic.
Yeah, it was kind of lame. It was like, oh man. Because as the reader, we're like, oh, James is in the picture again. What is he gonna do? What
He accidentally gets shot while hiding in a bush.
Yeah, he's hiding in a bush, and Dorian doesn't kill him. One of the people he's with.
It's an accident.
But again, Dorian is corrupting everyone and everything around him, because now he's made someone around him a murderer, through no fault of that person's.
Like I said, everything with James could have been so good.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't. And it was just, James Vane was so underwhelming, and I was genuinely disappointed in the entire subplot.
It is kind of unnecessary, but it's like also one of the only plot points.
That's like the last major thing that happened.
But yeah, so that happens.
Now Dorian realizes who the poor man was that was shot in this accident.
Brother of the woman, yeah.
He has a little bit of a crisis.
He does. This is the point where he's like, oh, I should try and clean up my act. And then he's like, I should be nice to my current love interest. But it really doesn't matter.
It never is out of actual altruistic reasons.
No, and
he's still trying to do it because he wants to maintain his own status, maintain what he already has in his life, maintain the relationships with the people.
Yeah, he still feels no remorse.
He never takes responsibility for anything.
He never takes responsibility. He never holds himself accountable or develops a respect for human beings around him. He's still only concerned with the way that he's perceived.
And I should have made more notes about like the very final scene, but I just wrote that he never takes responsibility, but this is his final destruction.
Yes, he throws another tantrum.
In front of the portrait, right?
Mm-hmm. Notable, the scene of the first murder. And in a similar fashion, Dorian throwing his tantrum takes a knife, stabs the portrait.
Well, what happens when you stab a cursed object that's been imbued with your own soul?
Plot twist, it kills you. The way this is discovered, so he he screams, and the servants hear him, and they're like, oh my god, and the police hear him through the window, because this is in a locked room. So the police break down the door, they bust in, and they find a beautiful portrait of Dorian in his youth, and a shriveled skeletal man who is so decrepit, they only recognize him because of the rings on his fingers. Which also, I think you can tie back to the Jewels of Kings, and jewelry, burial, blah blah blah, riches.
Yeah. He wasn't even that old.
No.
Because he starts off the book in, like, late teens.
Yeah.
Something like
I think
that.
He's supposed to be, like, 17, 18, something like that.
Yeah, and then 18 years pass.
Yeah.
He's not that old. But because of the sins of his soul have distorted this portrait, he basically becomes, like, he and the appearance of the portrait switch back. Yeah. So the portrait goes back to the way it's supposed to be, and he physically also manifests
his
all
soul,
this distortion that he's put upon his soul and the portrait, and it makes him unrecognizable.
Yes. So that is the end of Dorian Gray. And I do think the fact that he kills Basil in front of the portrait with a knife, and then later Dorian ends up killing himself by stabbing the portrait with a knife. It's very cyclical. Kind of closes that story in a very mirrored way.
Yeah. So what I had heard about this story was incorrect, because and I don't know where I got this idea, but I had heard that he couldn't look at the portrait, because if he looked at the portrait, that would cause the aging to happen to him. And that's why it was hidden.
That's, I think, a popular misconception in, like, pop culture and stuff. And I don't know, I think this comes up in the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Yeah, don't they have to, like, keep it hidden?
They have to keep it covered. You can't look at it. And I think the way, spoiler alert for the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Dorian ends up being a traitor, which, if you know the story of Dorian Gray, it kind of makes sense. So he sells out the rest of his friends. And then the vampire lady that he's kind of ex-lovers with, or whatever, kills him by unveiling his portrait, and he kind of crumbles away to dust. So maybe that's where you got it from? I don't know.
Maybe, but I feel like that's just a persisting idea, and that's why they also used it in that movie.
That's true.
I mean, I think wherever this originated from, maybe it's from, if there's an older rendition of this film where they didn't want to show stabbing. That was how they did it. This might require some research.
Yeah, that is definitely a popular misconception.
But that was what I had heard, which was not true at all. He hid the portrait away because he was jealous of it.
Yes, and then he didn't want anyone to see the state of his soul.
Yeah, he was already covering it because he didn't want to look at it and be reminded of his fleeting youth. But it's also interesting, there was a lot of discussion too about Lord Henry trying to convince Basil to send it to a gallery, and he kept refusing to do that.
You can make the argument that's also a commentary on art. Who does art belong to? Who should it belong to? Do you, as an artist, you're not obligated to share your art with the world. Like, you can make art and give it to your friend. Mm-hmm. You can make art just to make art, not show it to anybody. You have no, like, I think that's part of, because, again, this is a commentary on art as well as beauty, vanity, societal standards, etc., morality. What is the purpose of art? What is the role of the artist? What responsibility does the artist take in what they create as well? Because, I mean, it's not Basil's fault, obviously, but he is the person who creates the portrait that then becomes the way that Dorian gets to the way he is. But also, Henry is the one guiding that.
Yeah, well, on the subject of Lord Henry, his story ends in divorce.
He really deserved more. He deserved worse.
I guess good for his ex-wife for leaving.
Yeah, good for her.
Dumping, babes. This entire story really had no respect for women at all.
No, it really didn't.
But otherwise, I enjoyed this. I enjoyed being genuinely shocked by Victorian literature.
Yeah, Oscar Wilde is very readable. Like, as long as you can get past the first part of the book, not really having a lot going on. But it's entertaining because the way that Oscar Wilde writes, like, his dialogue
Oh yeah, I was
so
just enjoying the dialogue and the sass.
Mm-hmm.
And the relatable content. Because I shared this.
Yeah.
I don't even remember who it was. It was a woman. And she was talking about going to see like, musical performances.
Mm-hmm.
And she was saying that she can't go to see good music. And I was like, well, shouldn't you want to see good music instead of, badly performed music? And she goes, no, I can't go see good music because I always fall in love with pianists.
Yeah, you just told me that.
Oh man, this is some relatable content. You know what? There's a lot to be said here.
When you're right, you're right.
Like I said, people don't like seeing themselves in literature, but I was seeing myself and laughing at it.
Yeah. You gotta.
So yeah, I enjoyed this.
Yes, highly recommend Oscar Wilde. If you ever, if there's any in your area, any local theater company doing an Oscar Wilde play, go see it.
We should keep our eyes out.
Yes.
We could make, I was gonna say we could do like the Victorian dress up and go to the theater.
Oh, that would be fun. Well, yeah, we'll have to keep our eye out. So yeah, so if you haven't read Picture of Dorian Gray, I know we just spoiled the hell out of it, but I would recommend reading it because we didn't really pull out specific quotes, and you really get the audiobook and listen to it.
You need some of these quotes. Some of these quotes you need to start using in your real life.
Yes, and it's a novella. It's not that long, but it's easy to get through.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I said what I would change about it. There were a couple things that I think could have been improved upon. But overall, I enjoyed the story.
Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. I love Oscar Wilde. Icon.
All right,
legend.
We'll wrap it up.
That's it.
All right.
See you later.
Bye.
Except not, because this is not visual. Bye.